All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to a two-armed if here. But before we do, let's just review why we called these things one-armed and two-armed ifs. This one's called a one-armed if because we only have one optional path to take. We take that path if this Boolean expression evaluates to true. If it's false, we skip these statements entirely and just continue on with the code after the if statement. On the other hand, our two-armed if, which is what we're going to talk about here, gives us two optional paths to follow. We follow one if the Boolean expression is true, and we follow the other path if the Boolean expression is false. So we do this if it's true, that if it's false, and in either case, we continue on after the if statement when either this or that is done. Syntactically, it's pretty simple. If this Boolean expression is true, we evaluate these true statements. But now we have this keyword else, which we put after the if, and that contains the statements that are executed if the expression is false. All right, so evaluate the expression. If it's true, execute the statements in this set of curly brackets. Otherwise, this expression was false, and in that case, we'll execute these statements inside this set of curly brackets. Okay? Again, notice that we're using curly brackets for the bodies of our if statement. Even though we don't always have to, we're going to do it regardless. Okay? So we really now have a true-false decision as opposed to the one-armed if, which was true and then skip, don't do anything at all. Okay, so let's put that into action in a simple example. We're going to use a two-armed if inside a draw method to create an application that's going to look something like this. You'll draw a black line across the screen, and then this colored line will follow our mouse pointer. So as I move my mouse pointer around, we'll see that this colored line moves, almost like a hand on a clock. But if it's above this black line, the hand on the clock, if you will be red. If it's below the black line, the one that's following my mouse pointer will be green. All right? So a simple application, but it shows how we could use a two-armed if. Let's go ahead and do some design work to see how we might implement this thing. In this example, what we have is a screen, and we'll have it be square again. Let's say 500 by 500 pixels. And all the time, it's going to have a line bisecting the window, drawn from left to right, so a horizontal line, right in the middle of the screen. And then the user will move their mouse pointer over the screen. So if the mouse pointer happens to be down here, below that line, then the application is going to draw a line from the center point to wherever the mouse pointer is. And wherever we drag that or move the mouse pointer, this line will follow, and as long as we're below the center line, this will be green. Okay? On the other hand, if the user happens to put their mouse pointer above the center line, then what we'll have instead is a nice red line drawn from the center point to the mouse pointer. And again, wherever we move it, that red line will follow. Okay? So we always have a line drawn from the center point to wherever the mouse pointer is. If we're above this part, this line rather, then the line will be red. If we're below the center, the line will be green. And that's the behavior we want for the application. All right? So let's take a look and see how we might design that critter. Okay. Now we're going to have two things, two methods in this application, setup method and a draw method, much like what the other applications that we've had so far. Setup is going to be pretty easy, so we'll do pseudocode here instead of flowcharts because it'll be a little bit easier to fit everything on the board. Okay, so we'll set the size of the window to be our square shape like we want it to, and then so that the lines are kind of thick, we'll set the stroke weight to say 4. Okay? This is pseudocode, so I'm just kind of writing things down, and over here in the draw method when we do our if, you'll see how that works. We don't want to get too wrapped up in the syntax for pseudocode because it doesn't really matter that much. We don't want to get too drawn into that, but we're just trying to communicate the algorithm effectively. Then later on we can actually do the code, and that's when we worry about our syntax. Okay, in our draw method, first thing, let's go ahead and erase the background. Okay. And when we implement, we'll do that with a background method call, because what we're doing is animated. We don't want previous images to clutter up the view. Then we're going to go ahead and draw our black line across the middle. Okay? So, we'll set our stroke color to black, and then I'm just going to abbreviate, say that we're going to draw our midline. I won't go into the coordinates and things like that. That's pretty easy, and we'll cover that when we implement it. And we've done a straight line before, and so I can shorthand that in our pseudocode, and we get what we're trying to do. The next thing, though, this is the heart of the matter, is we need to choose a color based on our mouse location. Okay? So we're going to have an if statement, and the if statement will be a two-armed if that looks like this. If my mouse Y, so the coordinates of the mouse pointer in the Y direction, is less than height divided by 2, which would be halfway up the screen, right? If this is my application, there's the midway point. This is half of the way down. So if I'm above here, or less than height divided by 2, that will be my red area. If I'm below that, or greater than, or equal to height divided by 2, that will be my green area. Okay? So if mouse Y is less than height divided by 2, we'll set the stroke color to red. Otherwise, this is where the two-armed if comes into play. We'll set the stroke color to green. And then after that if statement's done, what we need to do is draw our line to the mouse pointer. And again, that's just a line method call, and we'll do that when we do the implementation. All right? And that should be it for our application. Very simple, but the if-else here, two-armed if, is the part that does the color selection, and really that's the point of the whole example. All right, let's go implement. Okay, now we can go ahead and start to implement this. We're going to need two different methods, as we said in the design. Our setup method and our draw method. In the setup method, what we're going to do is set the size of the window, and we know how to do that already. And we're going to set the thickness of the lines, and again we know how to do that already with the stroke weight call. Alright, very good. In the draw method, some things we also know how to do. We're going to erase the background with the background call, and we'll use a nice grayscale color there, sort of midpoint gray as the background color. And then let's draw our black line. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is set the color of the line to be drawn, and we'll do that with the stroke method call, and then we're going to make the line itself. All right, and since this is a horizontal line right across the middle, we'll start at 0 for the x coordinates and height divided by 2 for the y coordinate. That's one endpoint, and then our second endpoint will be width for the x coordinate, and again height divided by 2 for the y coordinate. Well, let's see how this works. I'm going to go ahead and save this and run the program. When we do that, we can see that we have our black line on a gray screen. Awesome. Now I'm actually going to skip the if statement for a second, and I'm just going to go ahead and add in the code that draws the line to the mouse pointer. That will be done with just a line method call again. But in this case, we're going to start at the midpoint of the screen, so width divided by 2, height divided by 2. And then the other endpoint of our line will be mouse X and mouse Y. All right, save it, run it again. And now there's that sort of clock hand line that I talked about that's following my mouse pointer around. Of course, it doesn't change color yet, but it will. And that's where we're going to come in with our two-armed if statement. So we're going to change the mouse pointer line color with an if statement. Okay, so our if is going to look something like this. If my mouse Y coordinate is less than halfway down the screen, then what we'll do is choose a red color for the line. Otherwise, it must be below the line, so in that case, we would choose our green color. Okay, so there is the skeleton of our if statement that's going to choose the line color. Notice how that I always do my brackets in pairs so that I don't end up missing one. All right, well, to change our line color, again, that's a stroke method call. There's red because red is the first component in an RGB color. And if I want green instead, there's green. Okay, so let's save this and run it. And there we go. Now if my mouse pointer is above the midline, it's red. If it's below the midline, my clock face hand, so to speak, is green. All right, so we're able to switch the color based on the result of a Boolean expression in a two-armed if statement right there. Okay? Awesome. We're going to go ahead and move on now from true-false decisions into multiple choice decisions. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is switch.